will be available, I believe, to you. So please do feel free to take notes if you wish, and you will have my contact details at the end. And I'd be absolutely delighted if you wanted to have a follow-up conversation or just ping me on LinkedIn. I really appreciate the support that you can give. So in terms of what we're going to cover, I'm going to just give you an introduction to neuro-linguistic programming. I will try and use NLP because clearly it's a quicker routine, as it were. You can see that there are different examples of NLP techniques I will be covering. So predominantly it'll be about communications and things here that you will find perhaps familiar to you, and some things that might be new to you. So things like presuppositions, meta models, IQs, these things might be new to you, anchoring and perceptual positions. But I would imagine things like rapport will be familiar, but this is how you can really get the best out of building a relationship using NLP. And at the end, I've got some information on how you can embed that into your mentoring practice. I do, however, need to put this disclaimer in because neuro-linguistic programming is about working with people about their mind, their sort of state of mind, how they come to you and how you want them or how they would like to leave the relationship. So when I work with anybody using NLP, I always ask them, do you want to make this change? Because they have the right, clearly, to make that decision. So what I will be able to say is that some of the information will be very clear that I can share with you, but there will be techniques that I will be talking about, and I will say, this is where you will probably need to either bring in somebody like myself who is trained in NLP, or you actually go away and get trained yourself. And I would say, I would really recommend NLP becoming a practitioner. It's extremely valuable in terms of what it shows you and reveals to you about what's going on in the wider world. So what is neuro-linguistic programming, or NLP? So as you can see, it says it's about empowering, enabling and teaching us the way that our brain, the neural network that actually is the control center of our body, in the way that we process words. And I would also add in the way we process information, because we're getting information all the time, as you can imagine. You can see my hands possibly moving around. I'm communicating verbally and non-verbally. And you can then take information from our past and from our present situation, and that means that we are programming ourselves to how we are showing up and how we are operating now and how we are influencing decisions in the future. So NLP is about giving us strategies for observing and learning from our own human behaviour. And at the core, it's about modelling excellence. So it is about knowing what you want to achieve, the process of actually going through that modelling process, and actually by learning and observing and embedding, we can make changes. So here's the history of neuro-linguistic programming, or NLP. It was developed by Professor John Grindler and Richard Bandler between 1972 and 1976. Now, John Grindler was an assistant professor in linguistics, and Richard Bandler was a student in psychology based at the University of California in Santa Cruz. So they were really interested in this whole concept of getting desired outcomes by modelling behaviour. So they studied the work of Fritz Perls, who founded the Gestalt therapy, a psychotherapy process, which enables people to understand the present and how they can use information to develop their behaviour. They also observed the work of Virginia Satir, who was a highly regarded family therapist who worked with the whole family and not with an individual child to actually explore how you can make change in that environment. And then with Milton Erickson, who was a world famous hypnotherapist. When he was 17, he suffered with polio and had a period of his life where he was unable to physically talk. And he observed the power of non-verbal communications and the use of linguistic patterns. So they created this process, NLP, and they've written books about it, The Structure of Magic 1 and 2, and Patterns 1 and 2, and these are available. They've also worked with other areas, and they've looked at, for example, anthropology with Judith Deleuze, Leslie Cameron as a psychotherapist, Robert Dilts, who was a psychologist, and then with Stephen Andreas, who was the son of Barry Stevens, who developed the Gestalt therapy. So they were working on this whole concept of learning by observing and then embedding that practice. What's really interesting is that there has been for a while this observation around how actually adults can change their behaviour. It had been thought that children can clearly learn and absorb information because you need to, and up to the age of 7, you're really like a sponge. But by the age of 11, you are creating and then playing out your story. So you can't make changes to that story. However, there is more evidence now that an adult can make change and that their brain is what we call plastic. So you can change the patterns of responses, which is really positive. So we can encourage and explore change. What is really important is to recognise that everybody has a unique representation of the world. They come from their own individual position, so they have lived experience and responses to situations which will inform their behaviour and the way that they're showing up. So this is really important because we clearly can see the world in the way that we do, but when you talk to people, they may see it differently. They may have something in terms of the way that they visually see the world. They may have colour blindness, for example, but they may also see something differently because they've had a lived experience. So the example here is a car accident. You have 4 witnesses, and those 4 witnesses will probably say different things about the accident. So we see things differently. So when we are working with what I would say a client, or when we are mentoring, we need to be aware of the mentee and how they are seeing the world and how we need to understand how they are seeing their world, so we can work with them to create a safe and confidential space that they can actually go really deep and explore what's going on to make that fundamental change. So it's really critical that we understand their map of the world, because we all have our different maps. So we have to elicit information. So the way that we do that is to observe and to listen. So we look at the way that somebody is working. So it's actually like a program. It is like an operating system. So we work with experiences, we work with knowledge, and we work with memory. And when we elicit information, we observe different states, and the body and the communication verbally will give us those clues to how that individual, our client or mentee, is responding. So we look at the words, we hear the words and the tone and the enunciation, but we also look at the physical movement of the body. And that can be very sort of like this, so I'm moving my hands again. It could be very small changes, so dilation in the eye, the colour of the skin, the breath. So there's lots of little cues that we need to work with. With NLP, to actually embed change, we have what's called presuppositions. So these are the principles, act as if. So you make some assumptions. So you can see some examples here. We are always communicating, and that is absolutely true. Even if I were now to stop talking to you, you would still be looking at me, and you would probably notice things like my eyes blinking, breathing, the way that I'm moving, again, my hands, my body. So we are giving off information at different levels. We've already said about the map is not the territory, so we are aware that we see things from our own particular perspective. We are all resourceful. We all have the resources within us to make the changes that we need. We just need to have the correct situation, question, support to enable this to happen. And that clearly you can already understand that how the mind and body work together. So what's coming in, it will be processed to give the bad behaviour response out. The one that I particularly like is that if it isn't working, do something else, because we can get into this pattern of doing something over and over again and get frustrated. You need to make a change and see how that change perhaps causes you to then have a different response. Choice is better than no choice. I think that is very clear. And again, that respect of the other person's model of the world. So we understand and elicit what they are feeling, seeing and hearing, and how we can make sure that we reflect that in the way that we work with them. So we work on something called meta models. So this is a high level way to understand how we are looking at patterns of communications. So essentially we distort, we delete and we generalize. And as mentors, we need to use specific questions to clarify and challenge what we're seeing and hearing. So we often use imprecise language, which, for example, is the word always. She always does that. Well, does she always do that in every time you see her or in that circumstance? It's actually unpicking the meaning of that language when it actually is being processed. So this, I'll just blow this up so you can see it better. And this is a really useful model because what you can see here is information coming in. So you're watching the screen and you're hearing me. So what's happening is that at the conscious level, you can process between 5 and 9 pieces of information at one point. There is a book called The Magic Number 7 by George A. Miller, who was a cognitive psychologist, who said that sort of 7 is the magic number, but you can go to 2 places either way in terms of the amount of information at that point you can actually take in. And at the conscious level, we're processing 2,000 bits of information a second, which is quite incredible. So we delete, we distort, we generalize. We use all the knowledge, experience, memories that we have to actually make an understanding of what we're actually seeing. So in this, you've got your programming, you've got your values and beliefs, which have been embedded from childhood, your ability to make decisions, and as I said, the impact of memory. So as information enters into you, you create an internal representation, and that is at different levels, and I'll explain that in a moment. So what's happening is that the information is then creating a state. So the brain will say, you need to do this. So it then impacts on your physiology, leading to a behaviour. So really, this is going round and round and round. And clearly, it's really important to remember that at the unconscious level, your brain is dealing with 400 billion bits of information per second. That is absolutely incredible. Your whole body, all the molecular level of your body is being functioned unconsciously. So at a conscious level, you've got to make some decisions. And this is what's happening every time we see a stimulus and we're getting an output. So for me, in terms of NLP and in terms of mentoring, rapport is absolutely crucial. And this is something that any mentor is probably already achieving, because you have a relationship, you know or get to know somebody, and it's about how you relate to others. So it's based on your experience and how you're showing up. So in essence, when you think about rapport and you actually sort of be conscious of rapport, it is a way to elicit responses. So if you're sat face to face with your mentee, or you're on screen with your mentee, what is really good is to be able to recognise how they are operating. So what you do is you either match or you mirror their body language. So if you were sat face to face, for example, and your mentee crossed over their left leg over their right, if you were matching, you would do the same. So you would cross your left over right. If you wanted to mirror, so they could look at you and see almost a mirror image, then you would cross right over left. And by doing that, by listening to the language that they're using and using that language back to them, in terms of asking questions to elicit information, you create that sense of space, trust and understanding. And it's when you're at that space that you can go deeper. And the clue is that when somebody goes quiet, you ask them a question and they go very quiet, it's the sign that they're going deeper inside their mind. They're looking for that clue, that piece of information. So we often try and jump in when there's silence. Silence in this respect is really critical, to let the silence be and then wait for your mentee to respond. You can then use that silence and response to dig deeper and to use that rapport to create that sense of, okay, this is how we can respond to this situation. So you build up the trust, and then you take into a leading position, whereas you were taking your cues from your mentee going forward to actually help them to look at solutions. You want to then go into lead, so they start to then copy what you're doing. So they sort of, you lead the body language. And when you actually want this to stop, so clearly at the end of the session, you do what we call break stage. You actually deliberately go away from the rapport situation. So I think this is really critical. Also, really interestingly, are eye accessing cues. So we give a lot of information from the way that our eyes move around. It links into our internal representational system to show where we are going to find that information. And this diagram, I think, really does explain really well. So if you can see over here, this is your left, but it's not everybody's left that does follow in this route. And I'll explain in a moment what you can do to test this. And then you've got the right. So left side is predominantly about recall. The right side is about creating. The space up here at the top of your head is your visual space. So if somebody is visualizing either a picture or a film from an event in the past, they will go up to the left. If they are creating, if you're asking them to think of a pink elephant, they are going to have to create that picture, so they will look up to their right. So if you also then work on an auditory level, you go from ear to ear. So if you go to the left, you can recall sounds. If you go to the right, you're creating sound or soundtrack. And then, as you can see, going down to the left, you're accessing your inner monologue. You go down to your right, you're accessing your feelings. And that saying downright mad is where you actually go. You do look down to your right to access your feelings. Now, this has been tested, and most people work recall to the left, creating to the right. But you can test this by asking a question, picture a pink elephant, and then just observe where the eye movements go, because sometimes somebody can sort of do recall to the right as opposed to creating to the right. So you can just check in with them by just elicit that information. So as you can already understand, that we are operating at different levels, and we call this modalities. So when you think about modalities, there are clues in terms of language. So again, if you're with your mentee and you are observing their eye movements and you're observing their body language, you then check in with their language. And if they are working predominantly in a visual sphere, they may say, I see what you mean. So they are creating a picture. They may say, that rings a bell. That's on the auditory level. They may know and sense what that response is. If you ask them, how does that sort of, what did you do in that situation? You know how that feels, and they will describe it, and they'll probably use body language as well. You also have these other two, olfactory, which is about smell. So something smells fishy. I know I've said this, it doesn't feel quite right. And then gustatory, it's that taste. So the sweet taste of success. So if you listen subtly to things like I see, hear, or feel, then you know where they are operating from. And from these areas, you can go deeper into what we called submodality. So you can then go further into their representational system. So, for example, if you're in a visual sphere, you can elicit information about what they're visualizing. So is it an image or is it a movie? Is it black and white or colour? Is it bright or flashing or singing, or is it dim? Interestingly, you can ask if they're in the image or the film, so they're associated, or if they are observing themselves in this, so they're disassociated. So if you're working with auditory, you ask them about if there is sound, if it's loud or quiet, if it's stereo or mono. If you're dealing with feelings, the kinesthetic, you can ask what does it feel like and where is the feeling. So people describe often if they're feeling anxious, it's in the stomach, it's in the pit of their stomach, and they will show you. And then you can elicit information. For example, what colour is that feeling? What is it made of? So when you start to work with this, you can actually start to, as a practitioner, I would have to say that you can actually then use this. So you can actually use something like the feeling to change its shape, colour and sharpness and shape, as it were. So with a picture, you can actually, if it's a difficult image, then you can actually get them to shrink it, you can change the colour, you can then get them to be disassociated, so they're out of it, so they lose that strength of connection. If there's sound, they can turn it down or completely turn the sound off. And if it's a feeling, you can get them to reduce the intensity of a feeling by changing the colour, shape and material. So if something's hard, heavy and dark, you want to make it light, sort of light, easier to manipulate and actually easier to physically move, so you can actually remove it from you. So this is really useful in terms of the last two techniques I just want to share with you. Anchors are really useful in the sense of knowing that we are resourceful and that we have the resources within us to make change. That if you have, for example, somebody who has to give a presentation, they're feeling nervous and they want to know what to do, an anchor is really powerful because it gets them to think of the time when they perhaps have been in a space where they have felt confident, or if they've done another presentation and they've elicited a good response and they can describe it to you in detail, so the full feeling, the seeing and hearing. So you get them to really relive that experience, and as they relive it and the intensities grow and grow. And as a practitioner, you can see by observing how this is growing, you can then get them to do what's called an anchor. So at the pinnacle of this expression of feeling about the state, they can actually perhaps put their finger and thumb together, or do touch their arm, or do something. And then you disassociate from that, and then you test the anchor. So you get them again to tap or touch the anchor that they've set to see how that is linking to the state that they want to be in. And with anchors as well, you can have them on your body. You can also create them and throw them out, which is interesting. Somebody who trained me could throw anchors before an interview. So you would touch the door handle, and then you would elicit the state that you want, say confidence. So I think this is really good because you can use all these triggers in terms of understanding the submodalities to actually then create that link to a desired state. This final example that I will share with you today is called Perceptual Positions. This is where often we are in conflict with somebody and we want to resolve it, but we don't perhaps want to resolve it directly face to face with them, or not at this stage. So it's really about looking at the positions in which we can take to elicit more information. So we can actually look at this first position where we are ourselves and we are describing what is happening from our experience. We then break state and then go into physically another position. And this is where we are in the footsteps, in the shoes of the person that we are having this disagreement with. And you hear from their perspective and you absorb what you believe that they are going to be saying back to you from what they've heard. And then you come out of that state and then you go into a final third position where you are talking to both you as you are and to the individual that you've had this disagreement with, and to give feedback. So in essence, through asking questions, you're providing new information, and you can use that information to go back round the three positions to see what has changed. And it's really interesting, having done that, people will observe different positions and thoughts depending on the information that's gone round, and it will then help them to find resolution in terms of that situation. So as we coming to the close of my presentation, I just wanted to share with you the ideas from this presentation and how you can use it in mentoring. NLP gives mentors a lot of information that we can work with to support our mentee. As I've already explained, it is about the process of building knowledge and understanding and elicit information. So once we understand more about the ways in which our mentee is operating, so on those levels of visual, auditory, kinesthetic predominantly, we can then use our language, we can mirror or match our body language to give them that space and consideration, and the space that makes them feel that they are being heard, that they have the space to consider how they can evolve themselves. So if, for example, they're looking at going for a job interview, you want to give them that space to be able to explore what the problems are or what they are seeing as the issues, and then using your experience in a way that is going to be most effective. So I would say that the number one tool that you're probably already using, whether or not you are conscious of it being an NLP process, is rapport. So this builds this foundational relationship, it builds the trust and confidence, and that therefore means that you have a strong mentoring relationship. It means that you are demonstrating that you understand the situation that your mentee is in, and you can explore with them the solutions at a deeper level. So this is really important. So as I've explained, it's about listening to the language to elicit how your mentee is operating. So looking for those clues. So if they're visual, they will be using words like see. They may be using their sort of eyes to look up, because they're using their eyes to look into their visual sphere. They may be looking auditory, so it's side to side, or they may be going down to their right if they're accessing feelings. So using this, using the language, so I hear you, I see you, I feel you, gives you clues on how they're operating. And therefore, as a mentor, I can say, okay, I hear what you're saying. How about building a picture of, so you can see how you can then tap into at the most effective level, and using those IQs will help you to see how they're responding to that. As I've already mentioned, the mirror and matching of body language is really important. You can do that clearly through how you're moving your body, and you can actually match it or mirror it to your mentee, but you can also use it to get them to work with you. So you start to lead them to when you actually go through a process of change. You also, as I've demonstrated, you can use the verbal communications, the words you're using, but also think about the speed of your communication, the pauses that you're using, the enunciation to match that of your mentee. All of this will subtly be picked up by your mentee, and they will feel that you really get to understand how they're working. And I think this then means that you can dig deeper. As I said about the silences, you can actually dig deeper. And once you go through that silence barrier, they're working at a deeper level, deeper state. You can actually work with them to find solutions to what they perhaps are coming to you about, a problem. And you will probably help them and to really feel that they have overcome perhaps a challenge that they've been working with. So I've put together some resources that if you want to, on receiving this presentation, want to go and explore, there's lots and lots out there. So this is just the sort of tip of the iceberg, as it were. There are some really good resources out there. And again, I would be happy if anybody wanted to have a further conversation about this, then you can come and talk to me. And you can get in touch with me. That's my current email address and my telephone number. As I said, I'm on LinkedIn. I've literally, in the last 40, I think it's now 49 days since I've set up my business, change of pace. I have been posting on a daily basis, so you can read my posts and comment on them, but also come and have a conversation with me. I'm really happy to support anybody who is working with a mentee, a graduate in particular, because I've worked, as Dan explained at the beginning, with a range of graduates, and it's been really rewarding and fulfilling. And what has been really good is that I've been able to support them using these techniques to make those changes, and they've many of them have gone on to either go to the next level of university or to go and get a job. And it's been brilliant when you hear those success stories. So that's it for me in terms of the presentation. So I will stop sharing my screen now, Dan.
Sure, thank you very much for that presentation. It makes perfect sense to me how these techniques really work well in mentoring. I hadn't really put the two together, but from building rapport with an individual through to actually guiding them and advising them how they can then use that in their own job application processes means it's a fantastic toolkit for mentors who are new to it or have been doing it for some time. So I really hope everyone who's joined us today can take something from your advice. So thank you very, very much for that, Elizabeth, and I'm sure people will want to follow up with you. I will email people all the slides, so that'll contain the links to the resources, and of course link in with Elizabeth for ongoing help and advice. So over to the questions. We've got 20 minutes or so for your questions that were submitted. So I've got one here from Ubitsa, who's from the Courtnall Institute of Art. And their question is, are NLP techniques more challenging to apply while mentoring remotely? Really good question, because obviously face to face you're picking up different cues, whereas remotely it's not, you're not maybe not getting the full picture, or are you?
That's a very good question. Thank you, Dan. What I would be observing is that you will get a level of cues, just looking at sort of facial expressions, eye movement, eyebrows. Clearly, when you were talking, Dan, I was watching your eyebrows go up and down because there was something clearly going on. The way that you talk, the position, the way that you're moving. So you're picking up a lot of information. I think the full body language in terms of the matching and mirroring works really effectively when you are face to face. But in terms of, if I were now to match you, I would sort of be shaking my head. And so you can do it on screen and it does have effect. I think it's really being aware of that you're doing this, but it's not to do it overtly, because I think when you do it overtly, people feel uncomfortable. So it's a very subtle, it's very gentle, but it's also about the language that you can pick up as well. So I would say keep aware, use your senses. You can do this online, but the best situation, as always, is if you can get into a face-to-face situation with your mentee at any point. It's so much more powerful.
Yes, it is. It is. It's just can be very off-putting. You're seeing yourself in, reflected back at you, so it can be quite disconcerting. So that's good to know. You can build rapport remotely, and that's what all our mentors do. It is all done on Teams or Zoom, for good reason, because we want to reach students and graduates from all over the UK. And when the opportunity presents itself, maybe we'll encourage people to have face-to-face interactions where that's possible. But good. I hope that's answered your question, Ubitsa. We've also had a question here from Tammy, which touches on a few other questions that people have raised, particularly about getting rapport with people you have less in common with, to use your words, Tammy. I've got one specific question from Darren from Systems Technology Consultants Limited, who says, are there any specific differences in the use of NLP with autistic people?
Now that's really interesting, because this is a journey I'm starting on myself, and I am setting up a conversation with a coach that is a specialist in this field. So it's something that I haven't personally experienced, but it's something that I am imminently going to gain more information on. So what I would say is that I would love to be able to pick up information and share it with you and the network. So as I get to know more, I can certainly be able to share that. I am acutely aware, again, that it's understanding your mentee and how they operate, and the sensitivities that we bring, but particularly people may not really want to have sort of lots of bright lights on, sort of lots of sound. So it's being respectful of the space that you can create. And I know it's all on screen at the moment, but there are clearly other things that we need to be aware of when you're working with people with different learning needs and support. So can I come back to you on that one as I find out more? Because I think it is definitely something that I'm really interested in doing more work around.
Sure, brilliant. I mean, we're trying to be as inclusive as possible, and when dealing with someone with neurodiversity, it's very important we are making sure we are building rapport and making sure that relationship does progress. And we want to do our best to avoid any mistakes along the way. So yeah, any feedback that you can give to us down the line would be wonderful. And I'll pass that on to Darren.
Yes.
So again, a similar question from Lynn from the EKC group. How can mentors adapt NLP when mentoring students from different cultural or ethnic backgrounds?
I think it's going to do your sort of getting to know you session, as it were, because I always have, if I can, I always like to have a introductory session to get to know my mentee. Clearly, with this, you might need just to have your first 5 minutes to actually do that sort of, oh, let's find out a bit more about each other, and you will have had some pre-session information. I think it is to be respectful when you are working with people from different ethnic backgrounds and cultures, to be able to give them space and to be able to appropriately ask them if there's anything in particular that you as a mentor need to be aware of. So in terms of what is expected culturally from them, as it were, in terms of, say, sort of their relationship within the family and within the community and so on. So I think it is all about, in terms of doing that rapport building, it is that being that sort of respectful, listening and understanding, doing a bit of your own research. But I think you always will get the most if you're firstly upfront and honest in that space with your mentee. Say, I'm here to listen and to explore with you. I really am curious to know more about you. And they will be very open in telling you what their experiences are. And then you can actually sort of work that through in terms of asking them, I have something that I can share with you, and perhaps go through it with them and say, does that work for you? Or how could this work for you? Because if it's not going to work for them for whatever reason, and I think this is a blanket across any mentee, if it's not going to work, they will say. If they you can say you can try it, but if you talk it through and it doesn't really resonate, then it's stepping back and say, okay, let's look at this, or let's see what else we can do to actually support you in this particular area.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's important for mentors to adapt when they think, the chemistry isn't right. They have to take a step back and think, right, I need to understand this person better. And it might transpire that it doesn't work, and there are cases of that. But it's important at least to be open-minded from the start, rather than just being very formulaic with every single person. That's where NLP comes in.
Well, it's again, it is the level of assumption, and we clearly know how we operate, and we use that as a way of thinking, well, they're not like me. How can I actually work with somebody? But you have to step back and take on all that information and find that area where you can actually come together. But as you say, there will be a small number of cases where there isn't anything that builds that relationship. You're not able to make that blend happen. So at that point, it is about being honest and upfront and seeing what the other options are.
Yeah, cool. Thank you very much. We have a question from Alina from GM, which I think is General Motors. How can NLP help unlock a person's potential during adversity? How can NLP help unlock a person's potential during adversity?
Well, NLP is really powerful because, as we've already been talking about in terms of building rapport, you can actually do a lot more when you are working in a way that they understand reflects their operating level. So through NLP, through those techniques of the language and the body language, it's really then building in questions to actually then dig deeper. So you will know when you have that level of trust with your mentee through doing the rapport work, that you can actually then go in and start to inquire deeper about what has caused this, where perhaps has this come from, this problem, because it's usually something in the past that's happened And this is where working with a qualified NLP practitioner would really be helpful, because I can use techniques that will actually help somebody to become, what I would say, unstuck or remove the block. And you can do that by asking the questions, but there are physical techniques that you can use to actually get that block shifted. And it really is about using those, what I've described as the submodalities. So if it's a visual block, then people will describe it. I know when I've had blocks, I describe it as a brick wall right here, and it's finding the way to actually remove that wall. So there's techniques then you can actually use to actually get them to think about their state of approaching the wall, how they're actually managing a process to actually remove the wall, whether it's brick by brick or whether they can do what I actually ended up doing, which was getting a bulldozer and actually knocking down that wall to actually move into another space.
Yeah.
And what I actually did was to actually focus on what was on the other side of that wall. So you know you've got a problem, you know where you want to be, how do you bridge that gap? So it's, again, it's unpicking those questions, those blocks. So I would say it's looking at the questioning, and I'd be happy again to have a one-to-one if that was appropriate, to talk through some of these techniques, because it is really powerful. Because once you can get somebody unblocked, you get a lot more access to all the different levels within their operating system, and they can be really much more forthcoming in terms of how they can be more responsive to ideas and suggestions and techniques.
Yeah, you're seeing the real person, and therefore you can help them more constructively, I suppose. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, cool. There's been a few questions about techniques, and I know you have covered it in some of your slides. Particularly the one, which way people look and whether they respond to visual or other cues. Someone has asked from a company called Kin and Carter, Shamer, what's a simple NLP technique to use?
In what respect?
Getting to know someone very quickly. Is there like one question you can ask, or something you I don't know, a simple NLP technique?
Well, my technique, whether it's embedded within NLP, is if I'm meeting somebody for the first time, I will always start with, tell me about you.
Right.
And so you can then listen to them in terms of the language and their body language. So tell me about your experience of. So then you will hear how they're talking to you. You will look at their eye accessing cues, and you can then go, okay, I can hear what you're saying. If you think they're working on an auditory, or I see what you mean. So if we were to look at this problem, how would you want to, what is the outcome you are looking for?
Yeah.
So what feelings do you want to get, or what is the process that you want to achieve, the state that you want to achieve? So it's that sort of representation in your language. So I think it is that basic principle that is not necessarily just NLP, it's just about life itself. Be curious, ask questions, because as soon as you show curiosity, you then elicit that interest. You can do naturally, I think, once you've built that connection and you're in that space, I just find it personally as a mentor really quite a natural thing to do, to look, listen and reflect back to my mentee through my body language, through the tone and the words that I'm using. It's such a natural thing that we do. And I think when you make it conscious, you can really improve it. There is a process in NLP that you go from being incompetent, unconscious incompetent, through to being a conscious incompetent conscious competent to an unconscious competent. So as an experienced mentor, we are probably at the we're on the unconscious competence scale, so that is stage 4. But sometimes you need to take yourself back to this being aware, so you need to go back to the conscious competent, because then you start to observe how you are showing up and you learn from yourself. So in terms of, how do I start a conversation? Is that the most effective way? Because you can try different techniques. So you may find that sort of you have a question that elicits information for you. But if on some occasions you're not getting the information that you're seeking, then you're like, okay, how can I change this? So put yourself back into the shoes of yourself, being curious about the other person and about how you are showing up. And that, I think, the building that connection happens in milliseconds. That sort of, it's really being aware that how quickly people make decisions or people are building that connection. So you can use that to your advantage. So be open with yourself, be curious, observe, and then naturally find that rhythm with your mentee. And you'll find that that relationship will, well, grow really beautifully because they trust you. You're not putting on an act. They feel that you are with them and supporting them.
Yeah, no, it's such a fascinating subject, and many of our mentors are also recruiters. So a lot of these techniques are used in interviewing, open-ended questions and things like that. And also, a lot of recruiters are trying to remove unconscious bias from their processes. So this also relates to that, taking a step back and trying to understand people without jumping to conclusions. So it's really a change of thinking, how you approach these individuals, be it on a mentor or as a potential employee. Now we've got one other question here from David from a company called Berendo. Are there recognized pathways to becoming an NLP practitioner?
Yes, if I can share just my own journey, I trained actually 10 years ago with a company called the Coaching Academy, and this was predominantly a face-to-face environment. And it was, I think I did 3 face-to-face full-day sessions, and then at the end you have to demonstrate techniques which are then assessed by somebody who is called a master practitioner. So they've gone that higher level. So I think it is worth investigating. Now I've looked, there's a lot of online courses that you can do, very short, bite size. I would look at the qualification that you get at the end, because you can learn these techniques, but it's definitely valuable to be a qualified practitioner because that is recognised. And in terms of your practice in working with other sort of like other people, other practitioners, and with your clients, straight mentees. So again, I'm quite happy if there's something that I don't know. Sorry, who asked the question?
That was David from a company called Berendo. So if he's not on the call today, I do have his email, so I could let him know.
Yeah, I'm quite happy to talk through if he's found something and he wants to just talk it through. And I'm also myself, I'm going to be doing master practitioner work, so I'm quite happy just to sort of give some outlines in terms of how I'm evolving my practice, and then he could, if he wants to, find out more from me before making any commitment to any other training. But I would certainly recommend it. It certainly is such an eye-opener, literally, for me, in terms of how you can use these different techniques to actually create such a powerful place of change. And it's a safe space that mentees really feel that they can achieve so much more because you've actually created the environment and you understand them just by being there and using things like the tools of rapport.
Yeah. I mean, just so important to listen to individuals, but also what they don't say. And we've had
Yes.
a few mentors who are interested in emphatic listening, which we may run a webinar on down the line. So it's all about understanding the individual before providing your guidance and advice. So thank you very much for sharing with us your 10 years experience. That's absolutely brilliant. And also for giving us useful information to follow up with if people do want to become an NLP practitioner. But I'm sure there's lots of takeaways there to help you with mentees and also with recruiting people. And also it's a brilliant life skill.
Absolutely.
You know, so such a useful thing to find out more about. So on behalf of all of our guests today, thank you very much, Elizabeth, for coming along. We will be recording this and sharing it along with the slides for everyone who's come along and spent their lunchtime with us today. Thank you very much.
A pleasure. Thank you, Dan. And thanks for everybody for showing up today.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Thank you, Dan.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you.